Hello all, welcome to Cafe Rainy Days. Today at Cafe Rainy Days, we are going to enter the world of textile, patterns, print, design, which is such a new field for me, and maybe for a few of our viewers as well. We are going to converse with Sejal Krishnan, who is a textile and graphic designer. She trained in Mumbai and then at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, and then in New York at the Fashion Institute of Technology. After a career spanning of so many years, Sejal now has a print and design studio, Zinnia Prints, and she also teaches. Sejal has also worked with several NGOs in India. Sejal has done projects with physically challenged children, women from rural areas and underprivileged backgrounds. And in the process, she's had some interesting experiences with. So over to you, Sejal, straight away. Why design?
First, hi Sujata. It's finally nice to put a face to a name. We've been talking for such a long time. Why design is because I think growing up, I was always very artistic, as they call it, right? Like, you always got the first prize in drawing competitions, or my mom was an artist herself, like she used to paint saris. So I grew up seeing a lot of art around me as well. I think that I never really consciously thought of a career in design. It just so happened that my aunt in Ahmedabad, her neighbor were faculty from NID. During the summer holidays, I would go with them to the institute. And then I would see all the different work that happened there. And I think I just subconsciously, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I was very scared to voice it because back then nobody really had a career in design. It was always like either you're a doctor or an engineer, or you do arts, commerce, science. But I think my dad was very supportive. I did have a choice of going into any field. But, in my heart, I knew I wanted to do something in art. I remember very clearly that we were standing in line in a college in Churchgate, and I was standing in line to get into science. And then he asked me that last minute that, is this really what you want to do? And I said, no, I don't. I want to do something in art. And right across it was Nirmala Niketan, the college, which was, graphic design. He said, shall we go get admission there?
Wow.
And I said, last minute. So we left the line. We went to Nirmala Niketan. We got admission there because not many people wanted to do graphic design or commercial art in 1984. And for 2 days, we just didn't tell my mom. We should be very upset. That's the reason why I got into design and graphic design. So I did graphic design as an undergrad. So I started working in an ad agency in Mumbai. And the hours were different in the sense that, you would work late hours. The environment was a little bit more liberal than what I was used to in a conservative home. The switch to textiles happened to be a little bit more conservative. Not because it was not a conscious choice. It was just that, people viewed textile as a little bit more homely than graphic design.
As a career, you call yourself textile and graphic designer. For the layperson, what does that mean?
So graphic design is basically you design your logos and your web pages and your prints or any kind of advertising medium that you see. That was something which I did earlier, many years ago. But, your heart was always in doing graphic design. Then I moved to textiles, where you learn a lot about surface design. So you create patterns, you learn about fabrics, their textures, and how to weave the fabric, how to create the fabric, kinds of fabrics. So I tried to combine both graphic and textiles, and I started specializing in print design, basically, which is more visual than tactile. Woven design, so if I'm doing jacquards or if I'm doing upholstery fabrics, that's more tactile, because then you're working with the construction of the fabric, you're working with, what weave you need to put over there, how does the texture feel, as opposed to print design, which is actually how the fabric looks, what is the design on the fabric, what colors should I use on it, should I make a modern print or should I make a very traditional print. So that combines graphics and textiles for me. So it was a perfect balance between both my worlds. That's the reason why I slowly specialize in print design.
So carrying on with this theme again for the lay person, if you could take us through the life of, let's say, a tea towel from the concept to the finished product.
Yeah, so for me, I started working with a manufacturer here in the US, which was a learning experience for me as well, because they were one of the biggest importers of home textiles, and the whole process of how a simple tea towel, is starts from design to shelf is a whole year-long process. So a simple tea towel or a simple table cover which sells for $2 on the shelf actually takes a year to probably make. Say I'm a store like JCPenney or Macy's, and if I need to manufacture one kitchen towel, I go to either I have my own in-house studio, my designers who will basically visualize a towel for say Christmas, which is in December. So it has to go into the store in September, which means that the manufacturing has to happen sometime in March or April, which means that your final decision has to be made sometime in Feb, which means your design has to start previous in December. So it's exactly a year ahead of time. So say that I'm doing right now, this being June, I'm doing summer for next year. So I look at the trends, what are forecast for next year. So next June, what are the trends? So you have an international trend forecast where we follow that, see what colors are going to happen next year, start designing accordingly. Then the design, so it could be different people designing. It could be the in-house studio designing, or it could be a studio like mine, which is like a print design studio, where I make about 20 patterns or 20 designs for spring summer for 22, and I send it over to the buyers or the designers at the store. They look at all the designs. They probably pick a few of them to see what fits into their store, the look of their store. And then once the paper design is bought or finalized, then it goes over to a vendor or a manufacturer, probably overseas. 90% it's overseas. Right. Then that vendor or the manufacturer, he starts manufacturing. He makes a small sample of it. The sample is made basically because you need to check the pricing to see how much that the tea towel is finally going to cost. So once that sample is made, it is sent back to the retailer. They look at the pricing. They say, okay, this tea towel is going to cost, manufacturing price is going to cost me $1.50. But the retailer says, oh, this is too expensive for me because I need to sell it for $2, divided 99 cents. So then the vendor goes back and says, okay, how can I change it? Look, or in my case, I was a product development manager. So I used to go back to the vendor and say, okay, what can you do to reduce or change in this design for you to make it at 99 cents, not changing the design overall, because you need to keep the aesthetic the same. So then we would say, okay, can you reduce the thread count of the fabric? Can you make it a little bit, lighter? So then right there, you reduce probably 10 cents. Okay, now instead of having 10 colors on this tea towel, can you have like 5 colors? So you reduce half the price over there. So instead of having an embellishment, which is like a better quality, can you reduce? So basically, if you see an embroidered tea towel, say you have 1,000 stitches in it, can you keep the same design and make 500 stitches so that you're reducing the price? So I think at one point your design becomes completely irrelevant. It's the price which basically drives your design as well. I think that was something which I finally learned when I worked with these exporters and the manufacturers, because I remember I had a buyer one time and they said that you could put whatever you want. You can put gold on it for all I care, but I want it for 99 cents. So that is the bottom line that's coming out from a design school, where the focus is purely design.
So it must be such a shock coming from sort of a complete design background and then stepping into this commercial world.
I actually found that very interesting because I started enjoying that a lot more. Developing products is something which I started enjoying a lot more, because I think after having completely designed for so many years, like on just on paper and not actually seeing your designs in the store, this complete sampling and production was very different, and I enjoyed it because you're actually seeing fruits of your work. You're actually seeing your design in the store.
It's not just a concept anymore. It's actually, and then of course, even after you've produced your sample, if the people don't like it, then it's going to take some more time.
It's going to, and that's why time is critical. Imagine a company like Walmart. They will not give you an order of 10 pieces. It's going to go into lakhs. So
Yeah,
they
wow.
need a lead time of at least 3 to 4 months for them to actually manufacture it as well.
And a smaller business could just make or break in this process.
It could completely. So that is the reason why you have things like stock lots. There are many stores which sell stock lots. Basically, all the manufacturers, if they missed their deadline, or if their entire production is rejected, you have companies which just buy these huge stock lots and sell it. Suddenly, you might just see in the market, you might see a store which has, IKEA tea towels. Not that IKEA sold it to them, but the manufacturer who's made it, who for some reason that whole stock of 100,000 kitchen towels was rejected by IKEA.
Right.
They have bought it and they're selling it as seconds, which are nothing but factory rejects. Could be that they missed their shipment time, or it could be that a button was sold incorrectly, or the label was the opposite side. So that is why these other companies buy it and then sell it as stock lots.
Let's move into your NGO part and tell us a bit about the work that you've done for NGOs.
Because when I started, I had to give up my job because, we traveled. My husband's company moved us around every 4 years. So I could not hold on to a proper job. And we were moving countries and continents. So I started freelancing and I started taking up these very interesting projects because by then the kids were older as well. Last one which I did, which was one of the most interesting, which I found was working for, it was a CSR project funded by a company in Delhi. It's corporate social responsibility, where basically every company has to donate a certain amount of their profits. And the objective was to empower a set of rural women with a certain skill set where they could make a sustainable living, selling the objects or selling the products that they make, the skill set that which we find. So that was interesting because we had to go work in a rural village called Faridpur, which is near Bareilly, and train a group of young women, basically age group 16 to 20, who are the in-between time between finishing college and getting married. So first thing what we had to do is we had to identify what is the skill set that they have. It had to be a commercially viable product, which we had to basically get them to make. So it could not be a badly made product. And all of them had to work collectively in the sense that, somebody was good at drawing, somebody was good at embroidery, somebody was good at stitching, but that didn't work for us because it had to be one collective skill set. The first week was just trying to see what is it that they can do well. And because we were working with very young women, what happened is their focus or their interests were very different. We tried different things. Like we first said, okay, can you stitch? We didn't have too much time to develop their skills as well. It's not like we had a whole month to train them. Then we tried embroidery. They lost interest because the concentration span was like 10 minutes.
Yeah, the young girls, right? Yeah.
They got frustrated.
Yeah.
So that didn't work. Then slowly we realized, okay, what worked for them is instant gratification, in the sense that we started doing tie-dye.
Right.
So that was something which they loved, because that is something which the results are instant, right? You tie something up, you dye it, and when you open, you get these fabulous results. So they loved that. So all of them can, collectively make one single product with the tie-dye technique, 5-6 different techniques, kind of made a full production list for them, saying this is what you do, and you have to follow exactly the same steps every time. And then they did very simple things, like they did tie-dye dupattas. We had to find a certain skill set and make that skill set commercially viable as well. It should not be that I'm buying that particular store because it's charity or because it's done by rural women. It has to compete and be on par with any other product that you put in a store. So that was the last project which I went with a couple of my friends and my classmates. It was a collective project. Like in the West, what I've learned is that every person has a certain skill set. And if you work collectively with that skill set, then I think your results are much better. So you're not like a jack of all. So, I'm not going to be doing embroidery and weaving, even though I've trained in it.
And it was interesting because, the people who sponsored us also were very helpful. They set up, they sent the right people to help us in the field, because we were going to a rural setting, which not everybody is very familiar with as well. So they
Hmm.
really helped us to make this project successful.
I was also going to say, how was it? Because I mean, you live in the States, and I'm assuming your friends were from like cities as well. And what sort of challenges did you face? The work is mainly rural, I suppose, and working
Yes.
with really underprivileged backgrounds.
I think it completely grounds you, and it brings you, onto the very basic level of reality, that this is what real life is. What we live here in the West is very glorified. A few years ago, I took my kids to, when they were in their teens, I took them to the Spastic Society of Karnataka, and we worked there for a month. In the first day, and they said, you have to eat with the children as well. Kids are eating little aluminum plates. You have to eat with your hand, and they give you sambar and rice and dal. And the first day or so, they were a little bit hesitant. Never seen anything like this. But I think they adapted a lot better than me initially, because the second day they were fine. They would even go to the kids' classrooms, and they would help them in the bathrooms. You don't have toilet paper, you don't have running water. So you learn to adapt slowly. And once you go and work in a rural village, your reality changes completely, in the sense that, when we were in Faridpur, I remember you couldn't even stand in one place for 5 minutes without having 100 flies around you. That one fly in a 4,000 square foot house suddenly seems so irrelevant. Where, I was working in Salem, and there were cockroaches and lizards in the room. So, you would suddenly cover yourself up completely with a blanket, because you don't want the cockroach or the lizard to fall on you at night.
I mean, I remember you were also mentioning this little village that you had to work in, which had one toilet, and
one toilet.
It's just unreal.
It's very unreal. It is, but it also grounds you. I remember one time very clearly that I was sitting in Dharavi with the craftsman, like with the embroidery guy. And I was bargaining with him for $20, 20 rupees, sorry. Sitting and telling him, no, this is very expensive. Can you reduce 20 rupees? And 20 rupees is what, like a quarter? And I'm sitting and bargaining with him, and then he's like, no, madam, this is very expensive. We won't be able to we get no profit. In the evening, we went out for dinner, and we paid 700 rupees for a glass of alcohol. And I'm bargaining with that guy for 20 rupees. And here I'm not hesitating to pay 700 rupees, which is for something which is so worthless, in the sense I don't need it. Your perspective changes.
His dinner depends on
the
what
20
he's...
Exactly. We used to go travel to India very regularly, on holidays. So I remember my daughter coming with me one time, and she kept looking at all these little, on the road, you have these little tailors who sit and do little stitching work, embroidery work. They get 20 rupees, 30 rupees is the most they get. And she asked me one time, she says, why is nobody, she asked me, why are you giving your clothes to these really good boutiques? Why aren't you giving it to this tailor who charges you 100, 200 rupees? And I said, because their work is not good. Like the quality is really bad. Like, she said, but if nobody gives them work, then they're never going to learn, because they're never going to be able to practice their skills, right? So suddenly that struck me. They don't really have any kind of exposure, because we are not giving them any work. So then from that time onwards, I consciously made an effort that every time I go to India, I'm not going to go to the fancy boutiques or those high-end tailors and give them work. So then even the best of my clothes, I would still go to those, Manish Market in Warsaw and still give those roadside tailors work, because I feel they need to learn. So you buy one shirt from here, and then you go back to them and say, okay, make me exactly the same one. So by trial and error, they charge you what? They charge you like $1 for it, as opposed to going to a boutique who would charge me $100 for it. You've given him a whole week's supply of food.
Sejal, also tell us your encounter with these goons in one of the villages that
that was very interesting, because we went to a village in the north, and see, we'd never really been to rural village. I used to travel and work to Panipat earlier, many years ago, where I know I was told that lock your door, like don't keep your door, because we'd be in hotels where there were only men around you all the time. This is, I'm talking about earlier on. I didn't think that would happen even recently. We would be told by the villagers that do not go anywhere alone. You're women. After 5 o'clock, absolutely not.
And this is fairly recent, and
this
even
is very recent. And there was this one time where we'd gone for dinner on, the highway, the dhabas, because obviously for us, it was more like a experience that you're going to sit on the dhaba and eat food.
Yeah.
So we were sitting in the dhaba and we were like the 2 women and 3 men at the group. And suddenly the dhaba guy says, okay, you need to pack up. You need to leave right now.
Right.
And, we were a little surprised as to why. Because he said, we are having these political party coming right now, and it's very unsafe for you guys to set up. So first we just left and we sat in the car.
Wow.
They said, okay, hide, you please don't come out. And so that was very new for both of us. So we sat in the car, and then at one point he said,
and you were literally hiding in the car.
We practically had to be in the car, not show. Then at one point we just left because we saw a few cars coming with a lot of music and driving rashly, and then we left.
Like a Bollywood film set, this sounds.
It's exactly like a Bollywood film set. They came and there was a lot of noise and all that. And then after some time when they left, the dhaba guy called us and said, okay, those guys have left. And that place was like a war zone. They had bottles all around and everything was turned, and there was rubbish. So suddenly that place, in a matter of 1.5 to 2 hours, completely transformed. And it's something what we'd only seen in movies.
Wow. So these guys had just gone and damaged property and just
damaged property because they were the local thugs of that area. And we'd heard of stories where they'll talk about, the women cannot go out, or this guy would be shot and that guy is shot. And
I don't think this will happen now.
Don't think it'll happen as much as like 3 years ago. But I think it very much exists. It's part of their reality. For us, it's part of fiction. There was this movie called Toilet Ek Prem Katha, right? And I'd seen it before I went to the villages. And I never really thought that this is reality, but it is. Yeah. We couldn't go out after 6:37 because you can't drive. It's exactly the same scene. You're driving in a car and you see people all along the side of the road. And that's when you realize that this is not fiction and this is something what is really happening in rural India. But
for them, that's their reality.
That's a reality. Yeah.
For us, it's like an adventure maybe every now and again.
It's an adventure. Exactly. You also can't try to change it, because for that matter, when you ask them, do you want to change your life? And they're like, no, we're perfectly fine. Like, we love what we're doing. We're waiting to get married. I'll stop working. I'll cook for my husband. And that is their reality, and this is their reality. And all you can do is help them better their life, not change their lives.
And that's such an important thing that you've said, Sejal, that when you go in, it's only to better their life rather than change. Because
and it's the same with the artisans and the craftsmen when you work with them. So it's another project which I did in Bhuj, in Kutch, where basically there's a group of women who are very skilled at embroidery. Like, Kutch is very famous for its embroidery. And they are skilled craftswomen. All they needed was to not change the skill set, but kind of enhance their skill set a little bit more, in the sense that the threads that they were using, the color would bleed, right? So suddenly the product which they make becomes an inferior product because the materials they have used were not the best quality. Their skills were unmatched. My brief was to basically enhance their skill set, create products which are commercially viable. So all I had to do was say, okay, change your color combination to make it a little bit more westernized, because, and the thing is, it should be on par with any product that you have in the stores here. But it was something as simple as, if it's a wallet, there are buttons that they would sew to, close the closure. I had to get better quality. I had to, basically change the sizing of it, because, very often they'll give these phone pockets. The problem is phones have changed so drastically in so many years, but they don't know about it, right? We would make bigger iPhone sleeves. Then we started making things like laptop, they were doing laptop covers. Laptop covers are like 15 inches back then. Now you have, iPads. So can you specifically make iPad covers for them?
So just giving them that guidance, really, and just enhancing.
And then can you use better quality fabric? Then set up like a little, whole production line where you give them very standard colors, saying, okay, these are the 10 colors that you're going to use. And these 10 colors you're going to be using in collaboration with these other 10 colors. And what they would do is they would do embroidery. And if it's like an iPad cover, they would completely take like months to do a whole embroidery. They'd fill it up and point, because they put in so much work, they would price it to a point where it was not affordable anymore. So then we said, okay, realistically speaking, how much would you spend on an iPad cover? So then you go backwards, saying, okay, this is the price that so going back to the same product.
That's where your production experience comes in. Yeah.
So this is your price that you're selling it at. Can you go back and say, okay, now all I need is 2 days of work on it for me, for it to be able to sell it at that price that you're going to buy it. Their skills and their sensibilities are way better than any trained designers, because they've been doing it for generations now.
Yeah.
But there was one project with the puppeteers in Nagaur village. So if you've seen, the Rajasthan Handicraft Emporium very often, you would see those standard puppets where it's the face and this cloth. And that's all they do. They just make those puppets. So the brief was to basically keep their skill set the same, but can you make more functional products with that skill set? A hanger or a magazine holder, or it could be like a pen holder. These are functional products which you don't mind buying 2-3 and having them around in your house. Basically, I didn't add any more materials to the product. Reason being, I don't want to add to their cost. So I can't say, okay, can you go buy something really fancy? Can you buy silk and put it there? Because that means you're adding to their cost as well. So then you have to work with the existing materials that they have, work with the skill set. And then we started doing things like, if you have the puppet head and they have the fabric at the bottom, can you turn that fabric around and make that into a magazine holder? Can you take the puppet head and then can you put that on a piece of, on a mug or a glass? Or can you carve, when they carve the puppet head, can you carve around it and make it into a pencil holder? Because that head is their identity.
And so it's like a brand, isn't it, almost? For Nagaur, so you don't want to change that.
And a lot of times when you work with these artisans or when you work with the NGOs, what happens is designers come in and they will, have design intervention, you go help them, you make these fabulous products. But then the cost of that product increases so much that they are not able to continue making more of that, because they have to invest more. So till the first lot is sold, they're not able to go on to the second lot because they have not still recovered the money from the first lot.
Of course.
These are the little things that you keep in mind when you work with the crafts. That secondly, market connectivity, in the sense that you could make fabulous products with them. But then what happens if nobody buys it? Like, who takes it to the market? Like, how will I bring that Nagaur puppet product to you? As a designer, we're not trained for it. We're not trained in marketing and business, but you need somebody else to then step in and say, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to then bring it to the market.
So you really need to be able to combine some business skills with these and artisans and a design guidance from yourselves and make a whole project out of it.
Make a complete project. You need like 3 different people or 3 different complete organizations from a crafts person to a market.
Another thing that I talked about was, how you were talking about the cultural gaps. So somebody in a rural village in India, they may be skilled, they even may be very well trained. They may never have seen snow, for example. And so when you're asking them to make something Christmassy, how do you bridge that gap?
Basically, I can also tell you my experience 30 years ago when I first came to the US. I started working. I went to school here, I went to college here, and I was doing my fashion design here. One of the assignments was to design an outfit for the first lady to wear on the inaugural day. So when I first came here, I remember designing this outfit, and being very typically Indian, I put embroidery and I put print. I thought it's like you make a skirt where the more you have, the better. When I first came here, all my outfits of which I would design would be the same thing. It would be like embroidery and print, and it would be like long sleeves and the more sleeves and collars. And I would keep asking my teacher that, why is it that, I've come from a design school in India, I've worked in India. Technically, I would always get an A because the garments would be technically correct. But in terms of creativity or in terms of designing, I would always get really bad grades. And that's when I slowly realized that culturally, we are so different. Back in India, back then, we never really paid attention to, these contexts, in the sense the seasons are different, so your colors are different. Everything is embellished. As something very plain, it will be like, why are you wearing such a plain outfit?
Yeah, that's just cultural, right? Yeah.
that cultural mindset had to change to that extent where I remember when I started my first job as a print designer in a studio in New York. One of the first few things I had to draw was Tarzan. The theme was Tarzan, the wild, and all that. So I started drawing, and my designer, my senior designer, came up to me and she says, the men that you're drawing are very thin and tiny. I draw men the way the men are in India. You have to make it a little bit more global. Like you have to make your men more westernized. You have to have like blonde hair, and you have to make them a little bit heavier. And so
muscular and taller and bigger.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was also a learning experience for me. So when I do projects with India, when I work with the artists, when I'm doing Christmas with them, for example, I'm teaching them, I said, okay, I want reindeer. So I give them visuals that I want a reindeer and I want a tree. The reindeers will be like the Indian deer, a little bit thin and scrawny. For example, if I'm doing I'm doing rabbits for Easter, the rabbits will be little tiny. So I keep telling them that, you have to realize that the rabbits that you see in India are like the squirrels that you see here.
Yeah.
Then you have to keep giving them pictures. You have to keep giving them visuals saying that this is what, the animals here look like. The men look like this. The Santa Claus is nice and chubby and round. A pumpkin, when we do Halloween, you have to over and over send them pictures that a pumpkin is not a tiny 5-inch round. It's a huge pumpkin. Then we made them watch movies which have Christmas theme or Halloween theme. So for them to even get a little bit of idea. These are guys, mind you, who don't even speak a word of English.
It's the exact opposite to give you an example of somebody in the West learning Kathak, for example, will have to be told the story of Ramayana and Mahabharata, shown Bollywood films, and why it's so important to be colorful.
I think the sensibilities are different and the environment is different. Like,
why do you think the West should still choose India for design?
For design, I think when it comes to production and when it comes to any kind of manufacturing, the West has already chosen India. That kind of factories and machinery is something which is already established years ago. It was there even 30 years ago. Like I tell many people who have never been to Karur or who've never been to Erode, if you blindfold yourself and if you go there to one of the factories and if you open, you would not know whether you're in Germany or you're in India. Even a village in Karur, like a village like Karur, a factory in Karur, which is, you take 2 hours taxi to go there. Nobody speaks a word of English. It has got the best state-of-the-art machinery. Manufacturing was always happening in India, even back then. All your home textiles majorly are made in India or China, right? But India being the bigger one. Design, I feel, because there's so much of talent available, there's so many designers back in India. So it's not like we have lack of talent over there. I think the gap is there because the sensibilities are different. So just like you have, like I was telling you, that I'm surrounded by IT people where all the work is outsourced. People are working with India team, America team, Europe team, and the whole their world is flat. The IT world is flat. Like design field, it's not yet flat. And anything which comes from India, it's you put it into an ethnic group, saying this is an ethnic design. A paisley is still a paisley from the East. A paisley is not a Western element to begin with. So that is something which I feel that needs to slowly change, in the sense that talent is there. We just need to teach them a little bit more and to basically bridge that gap and make it the same flat one world that exists in all the other fields.
And vice versa, right? I mean, in the IT world, for example, people are getting more and more aware of, yes, there is a time difference, for example, or there may not be electricity, or India probably has Diwali holidays at the moment. These sort of sensibilities, it's a balance of the West understanding how India works and India understanding how the West works. And that sort of a flatness hasn't come in the design world as yet.
And textiles, see, like I said, whenever I talk about something, it's completely to do with textile and print design. I really don't know what's happening in the other worlds, like animation or furniture. I think I'm talking about when I say that kind of flatness has not happened, it's purely the print design and the textile world, where we have talent back then. That is one of the main reasons for setting up Zinnia. Reason being, when I was teaching, I knew that there's a lot of talent. The only thing lacking was that connection. You have So you have the talent back there, you have the market out here. How do you connect the talent and the market? That was one of the main purposes of setting up Zinnia Print, given a little bit more training and a little bit more exposure. Also, in terms of taking part in shows and all, like a lot of designs are sold in trade shows. And all these trade shows are in Western currencies, so it's a huge investment for any Indian designer to start their own design studio and say, okay, I'm going to compete with the West in terms of spending money on trade shows and having meetings with buyers. And that's the reason why we fail, because they're not able to do that. The initial investment is not there. So the whole purpose of Zinnia Prints was to basically connect the talent with the market.
So a couple of last questions, Sejal. So any advice to the new designers?
Yeah, lots. It's not a lucrative field in terms of money, right? And I've been with IT people all along, and I know the salaries and I know the fields, I know the opportunities that they get. So I would tell any student of mine or anybody that you really need to go into this field for the love of it. You really need to love it, because financial returns might not be as good as any other field. Maybe, I don't know, at least not right now. So you don't go in with the expectation that you're going to earn equal to what an IT person gets. That's not going to happen. Just like a doctor is responsible to save the patient, your responsibility is to save a person from design blunders. That's your responsibility. You need to definitely make sure that good design is brought to a common man. And that's what you're trained for, right? So then why not do that? So that is a responsibility I feel we as designers have, to bring good design at good prices to the average market. I keep telling my students that when you start working, you're a textile designer, consciously try to wear handloom, try to buy good quality, buy one thing, but buy a good quality one, so that you know the process, you're supporting a craftsperson behind it.
Very last question, Sejal. Really, to sum it up, anything that makes it worth your while, that you've been in design, any experience that jumps up and says, this is it.
A lot of things. Like, I think I was fortunate enough to have very inspiring people around me to teach me along the way as well, right from my graphic design faculty professors who were like so inspiring. But I think the life-changing moment for me was when I worked with Satyapal, like the designer, when I worked very early on in my career, because I think the way he approached design was so different. For him, design was more spiritual. For me, till then, it was just something which you're doing, you're drawing, you love drawing. But for him, it was so spiritual, to the extent where he kept telling that every stroke or every form that you do has to be in your full consciousness, and it has to come from within. To the extent where he said, even when you're drawing, don't focus on anything else, but on the connection has to be there between your heart and the pencil. You're drawing, it has to be like almost like a breath that you take. And I was, you're younger at that time, so you really don't focus on all that. But I think that has stuck on to me for so many years now, that I see the difference between a good stroke and a bad stroke, or a good form and a bad form, simply because exactly when you see a good artist or a good designer, that output is from the heart, as opposed to something which you're just doing because you need to submit work. For me, when you asked about inspiration, I think every faculty, but the life-changing moment was when I worked with him. In fact, I worked a year with him right in the beginning of my career, and I'm glad I did it at that time, because that completely changed the way that I worked. Had it been later on, I think that you would have been so set in your ideas and your way of working that you probably would not have, I would not have been able to imbibe what he taught, because it made me focus on print design. It made me focus on forms. And I think that is how it shaped my career completely.
And that this sort of learning stays, and it
stays. It also helps me look at things. So when I see another design, you can look at it and say, okay, does this actually stir something within you or not? If it does, then yes, it's a good design.
But for anything, a singer, when somebody's singing from the heart, who's drawing parallels with other art forms.
It's the same thing that, when you cook, I've seen trained chefs, but there is no soul in their food. Whereas you've seen untrained chef and their food is absolutely flavorful. Reason being, there's a lot of soul in the food, in the way they cook.
Such a fascinating journey, through all these colorful weaves and patterns. Yeah, thank you very much, Sejal, for coming on Cafe Rainy
Thank you,
Days.
Sujata. It was so nice meeting you. Lovely. I'm so glad that you did this. And I hope that this reaches many people so that people are
Yes.
interested in the design field and buy and help the crafts